Welcome to Becoming and Belonging, a journey of identity and culture. I'm your host, Amy Huggins from Ascension Wellness. Each week, we embark on a journey of discovering who we truly are, navigating the nuance of identity and culture, and learning what it means to belong in our own skin and in the world. We are talking today about empowering authentic, neurodiverse connections with respect to the needs of neurodivergent people and those around them. Joining me today is Julie Meyerowitz, who was traditionally trained as a speech language pathologist at Columbia University in New York City, following her somewhat less traditional education in drama therapy at Boucher College in Baltimore, Maryland. With extensive and diverse study in multiple modalities beyond this foundation, she challenges the gold standard in autism treatment. Over time, Julie has developed and refined a method that is transforming the lives of neurodiverse individuals and families. Julie is a human development and relationship specialist, guiding her clients' progress in authentic communication, cognition, connection, and overall quality of life. Her clients experience noticeably greater results while significantly reducing the effort they invest. As a neurodiverse woman, Julie is particularly inspired by helping parents and children gain confidence in their own abilities to make space for themselves and get what they want in the world. As a speaker, Julie is motivated to share her clarifying and empowering philosophies, wisdom, and insights with as many people as possible. Julie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much, Amy.
It is so wonderful to have you here. I have been really excited to have this particular conversation. It's one that is near and dear to my heart. But tell me a little bit more about you and your
About me. So me personally, like in what way am I neurodivergent, I think is possibly like the personal, and we could talk about the professional. Um, I was diagnosed not with autism, but with ADD when I was 17 years old. And I actually, going to professionally, I thought that I wouldn't be specializing in autism because it was such a popular field to focus on. And I'm like, okay, it's being done. But then those became the students and clients that kind of were like keeping me up at night that I was thinking about while I was like folding laundry and like driving home from work and putting my kids to bed. And largely because the training that I had received, I felt like it was falling very short of what was really needed. And I was like following the rules and doing what I was told and what I had learned, and even like going for additional trainings and everything. And I'm like, it's not fitting. And at this point, I actually, this is on the lead magnet that we'll talk about later. I think the second or third email that you get after you click on it, that I think what I've created my method in response to is it seems that when talking about autism intervention or talking about autism generally, and this was a lot of like yours and my back and forth about what the topic would be in our discussion there, or even just what to call this discussion, there is a focus on the needs of one side and the where the other side is falling short. So either the needs of like society or the expectations of society and how the neurodivergent individual is not meeting those expectations and therefore like fixing that differentness or brokenness or whatever. Or, and it's understandable, like more recently, there these are people who like the neurodivergents have been raised in sort of like these models and they're pushing back understandably, but then there seems to be, in my view, what ends up being like an overreach in my opinion, that it's therefore like we're fine, you fix yourselves. Like the world must fix itself to accommodate us. We're not, I think it's a matter of we've been pushed too far and pushing back, which is understandable. But again, it's like the word that kept coming up in our email exchange was bridges.
Yeah.
There's no bridge in that. And when the breakdown, whether you're looking from one side or the other, when the breakdown is relationship, the solution isn't blame,
Right.
right? So it has to be acknowledging the reality, like this is who this individual is. Yes, we have to accept them if we want to relate to them.
Mhm.
Also, this is how the world is. Like you can't like first of all, if you put yourself on a mission to change the world to accommodate you, all you're going to do is you're going to exhaust yourself or to accommodate your child. Often it's the mother, right? that goes on a mission to force the world or to create an alternative world to accommodate the needs of their child or to just escape from the world. And then the relationship isn't there. So it needs to be an acceptance of both sides and an acknowledgement of the value and challenges that are happening on both sides, but also like where is the static? What's the static in between that is making it difficult for the neurodivergent individual to independently and spontaneously in part of my training they called it personal agency to put themselves into the world as themselves, not as a script or as a cookie cutter version of whatever is correct or compliant. I'm sure you've heard that word a lot.
Yes.
Compliant. Like if you think about like for anybody listening to this, if you think about your most meaningful relationships, because again, what we're going back to is how do we strengthen relationship to self and the world and all of that. How often when you think of your most meaningful relationships, you think like, you know what? My husband's really compliant to me.
Right.
I really love my best friend because of how well I can comply to her demands. It's not a relationship. It's not a healthy relationship.
No, it is not.
No, it's not. And the other thing that often comes of this is either just total rebellion from one side or the other against the relationship, or like a codependent kind of a dynamic that again, like if both sides are not freely and truly and authentically themselves in the relationship, there's no relationship. Like it's like either everybody has nullified themselves or one side must nullify themselves to accommodate the other side. So that's sort of, and also like, as a neurodivergent woman, I've been in lots of therapies myself and also have found like a lot of just dissatisfaction. Like this is not helping me to make the way my brain works and the way my nervous system works. And a lot of people, I'm sure you're more aware of the nervous system than most people are, but a lot of people think of it as decisions. Like you think, I'm sure you've heard or witnessed or maybe been part of many times that dynamic of the neurodivergent individual having a hard time with a situation. And then the parent or educator or therapist kind of in panic mode saying, make a good decision, make a good decision.
Yeah.
Like, well, they're not in a decision-making place.
Right.
Yeah, because it is not what their mind is doing, it's what their nervous system is doing.
Exactly.
Because it's all about safety, which I'm sure you and I could talk about for much longer
We could.
than you have time for in this podcast.
Yeah, a couple of things really, well, so much stood out in everything you just said. That was
Thank
just such
you.
a rich little bit to kick off our conversation.
Thank you.
One thing that really stood out to me is I was reminded, weirdly, of when I was 13 years old. I went through this
Wow.
whole thing of trying to understand the nuance of the word freedom. And I don't
Oh,
know
I love
why.
that.
I don't know where it came from. Freedom is a thing Americans like to talk about, so maybe
Yeah.
that's where it came from. I have no idea. But what I do remember thinking is that word is more complicated than I think most of us tend to think.
Right.
Whose freedom are we
Right.
talking about? Are we
Right.
talking about my freedom to be healthy? Because in that case, I don't want pesticides in my world. I don't want
Right.
cigarette smoke floating over to my yard.
Right, right.
Or are we talking about my neighbor's freedom to
Mm,
smoke,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? So that
Right.
word can get, ooh, it can get loaded real quick.
Right, right, right.
And so in a situation like this, the word freedom might not be a direct translation, but I think it still fits because the next thing that really stood out to me with what you were saying is we're talking about two different groups of people. We're talking about the world in a general sense, so AKA neurotypical people.
Generally. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we're talking about
Yeah.
neurodivergent people. And there is
Right.
this MO, culturally speaking, we have a tendency to think that the status quo is correct. And I'm not
Uh-huh.
sure why we have that thought, but we do.
If you
And
look around, it's not always working so well. Like,
exactly,
yeah.
which is why I love
Even
having
for
conversations.
neurotypicals, it's not always working so well.
It's usually
Right.
not. I mean, there are aspects certainly, but I think it's
Right.
so important to really analyze. I had a conversation with my adult son this morning on this, on how important it is to exercise critical thinking and not be too attached to
Right.
the things we're analyzing and being able
Right.
to say, you know what, tradition has its place, it's warm and fuzzy, it's supporting, it's wonderful until it
Right.
isn't. So when it is,
Right. Right. Right.
we got to be okay saying, okay, maybe it's time
Right.
to either pivot or scrap it and start anew, whatever the case may be.
Right. Right.
So the status quo quite often is coming from a traumatized place, collectively.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And when we're in that traumatized place, in that collective sense, it informs the stories, the meaning that we make of our perceptions. And so,
Totally. Totally. It gives us our lenses. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Yes, I love that word because I talk about
Yeah.
trauma lens. We're looking through our trauma lenses.
Right. Right.
And so then when we're interacting with, say, for example, a neurodivergent person who isn't fitting in with that status quo, our nervous system doesn't know what to do.
Right. Right.
Sometimes a neurotypical person's nervous system might not always know what to do because, well, why are you being different? I don't
Right.
understand what's happening right now.
Right.
So then we get into pathologizing and saying, oh, the neurodivergent person is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want our audience to hear that they are not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they are neurotypical or neurodivergent, they are perfect, exactly as they are. And so what you and I are talking about is this learning a different communication,
Right.
just that bridge.
Right. Exactly. We keep coming back to the word bridge.
Yeah.
And also, like when you just said, like, nobody builds a healthy relationship on compliance. But I love that you use the word freedom. Like as you're talking about freedom, I'm thinking, you know what? That's freedom and safety.
Mhm.
And I think that we don't necessarily often think about how those two things go together. Like when I think about my husband, I think about I feel safe with him. I feel like I can be myself with him. I could be free with him. Like with him, like we show each other our true selves instead of like the correct mask that we might take to like a business meeting or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what does that feel like for you? And it might be different for other people, but just I wonder if we could just give a little embodied sense of what does that safety feel like?
Mm, this is a fun conversation. So first, I actually want to say it's something that we had to develop. Um, I One of the tricky things about telling your story publicly is that you're not only telling your story, so I have to be careful. But I will say that he is also neurodivergent. And we were also older when we were married. I was 30 and he was 32. And we're coming from a traditional culture where that is considered to be older. And so I think we came with a lot of defensiveness. And there were a long time of conflict. And actually, a lot of my development of this method was I needed to make our lives work.
Mm.
And that's kind of how we like he and I and our family were like my first test subjects. As kind of my first reassurance, like, okay, I'm finding like the right cocktail of the best of that method and the best of that method and what I know to be common sense is missing in all of these methods. Um, and like he and I, we've said over the last couple of years in particular, like and actually, we just had a relative over recently, and she's she's turning 20 next week, and she was at our wedding 16 years ago, and I just found pictures and everything. I mean, like we were different people then. So we've
Yeah.
been saying recently, like we've changed so much. We're more ourselves than we ever have been.
Yeah.
And I think I think we breathe differently.
Mm.
Like I think that I still have work to do on this. I still breathe more shallowly, but like we definitely take a lot more time for self-care.
Mhm.
We recognize that what it's not like it's something it's not like the prize like in a behavioral kind of a training that you get when you do everything correctly. That it's the foundation on which everything is built, doing
Oh,
everything authentically. And that is actually the major thing that I see in my method that it there was a nod to it, and I a lot of this is built on what I've learned as a speech therapist. A lot of it is a rebellion against what I learned as a speech therapist. Um, and a lot of sort of thinking differently. I got sort of like permission from that. So I've been trained and certified for many years as an RDI consultant. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a relationship development intervention. But then I sort of there were things that were not clear to me, and then things that seemed to be missing, and so building on that. So that was the first time that I ever saw sort of a recognition and a method that they say get out of crisis.
mm.
And that's sort of like that to me that provide as that was like the first step in their method. And to me, that gave me a lot more questions and answers. I'm like, I'm a speech therapist. I don't know how to get people out of crisis. Um, but to, in the what that's evolved into in the method that I'm using now is just much more of just becoming aware. And I think also in that method, it was sort of like, do this, and then you can go on to these next steps, as
Mm.
if that's a moment. Like, do you remember the moment that you got out of crisis and then you just moved on and then you were never in crisis again? I've never had that moment.
I have not
Like,
either.
we're just talking about, like, without getting into details, like what's going on in your area and what's going on in my area. Like, there are crises happening all around us, like out of our control. But being aware of just what's like our nervous systems we were talking about, and like knowing that you have choice and there are things that you can do that you have control over despite what's going on in the world. And I actually think that's probably one of the most valuable things for neurodivergence to know, and for like caregivers and like spouses and children, and all of us actually, but like in terms of like helping a neurodivergent to be fully themselves in the world, we also have to be like if we're the support system, we also have to be responsible for our own nervous systems.
Yeah. Well, that's
That's
a
actually, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
that's a powerful statement. We have to be
Right,
responsible for our nervous systems. And,
right.
none of us are taught a whole lot about nervous systems and
No.
what any of that means or what it looks like. And we have all of these experiences and emotional flooding
Hmm.
and depression and anxiety and all of the things. And we have
Hmm.
no idea how to make sense of what we are experiencing. And we can feel like
Hmm.
we are wrong, we're broken, we're falling apart.
Hmm.
Things.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to get into a whole trauma training in one episode, but if I could just have our listeners know
Right,
that their experience is not indicative of them being wrong or broken. It's actually their
right.
talking to them. And so that's the whole realm of understanding nervous system speak and understanding trauma and understanding what it means or what it looks like to be in a healthier state and how to get there. But
Hmm.
that's what you're alluding to is
Right,
that nervous system communication.
right, right. And my method that I do is almost all my clients are I'm working with the parents of children, and I sometimes children means like adult children living at home,
Mhm.
like of neurodivergence. And And a lot of the work is about what's happening with your own nervous system. I call it getting the download.
Mm.
That so in my RDI training, to me, this was like a I don't know what you call it, like a brain explosion, kind of like an epiphany. There's less graphic than a brain explosion, an epiphany kind of a moment that Dr. Shealy, who was training us, said, you cannot be co-regulated, and that's regulated in connection with another person unless you're self-regulated.
Yeah.
And then only later did I learn about Dr. Porges and the polyvagal theory, and he phrases it exactly the opposite. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, which is it? He said, you can't be self-regulated unless you're co-regulated. And so that really gave me a headache for a while until, first of all, it's a very chicken or the egg thing that it's reciprocal.
Mhm.
But to me, in my mind, the starting point is that, can I say biologically? This is kind of like a working theory that I have that seems to be working as I apply it in my coaching. That what's meant to happen is that and you could probably say much more about this than I can, that we are meant to be raised by self-regulated, safe caregivers.
Yep.
And then through them being self-regulated and then interacting while they're self-regulated with us, that's co-regulating, that's where we get our download. And that's supposed to like go on for eternity from generation to generation, alpha, omega, amen. But I didn't experience that.
Not either.
And I don't think I've had a single client that was like, oh yeah, my parents were always perfectly regulated. So I call that like getting the download. Like most of us didn't get the download. And yet, if we want, this is another thing. Like I think a lot of people have their expectations flipped, including by experts. Like a lot of the like gold standard treatments are upside down.
Mhm.
And to have this expectation, like once I fix my child's behaviors, for example,
Yes.
then I could be self-regulated. It's only because, like, this is not me talking, but like what I've heard frequently, and not word for word necessarily, but sort of like the message I say, I'm fine.
Hmm.
If only my kid would get himself together, then I could be self-regulated.
Yeah.
Which there's like, if you really stop and listen to that, it's like, I will not take responsibility for my own self-regulation until my kid gets it together.
Yes.
So what are you modeling?
Exactly.
So it becomes like a lot of folks think like, oh, once my kid, like, so as a speech therapist, once he has words, we'll be fine. So you get a lot of drilling words, and then he has a lot of words that he's not saying in a way that are meaningful to you. It's still not communication, for example. Or once he gets those behaviors together, we'll be fine. So that means that the parent has given themselves permission to be dysregulated until the kid fixes their behavior. Fixes, meaning like compliance, that they behave the way that I want.
And it communicates that the child is broken.
It communicates that the child is broken. Often also, this is a lot of where the codependence comes in. The like sort of world of educators and therapists communicate, your child is so broken that you can't handle it. Hand them to us. So the people who are supposed to be helping you have just undermined
Mhm.
what's supposed to be like the most meaningful thing for you in your life that you dreamed of since you were a child. And like, and and also possibly even more detrimentally, but also tied into that first thing, they've undermined the most important relationship that your child has. And they've made you codependent on them. Now, how are you going to help your child to be independent, or as independent as they could be and as self-determining as they could be, if you don't trust yourself with them? One of the most heartbreaking things that I see at the beginning of like meeting families, like, okay, tell me about your family, tell me about your child. They'll tell me about themselves. When they want to tell me about their child, they take out their phones to give me the number of a therapist.
Oh,
And I've seen it too many times. These are parents that have been made to believe that their child is so broken that he or she is beyond them. And not being a professional means that they are incapable of handling this quote unquote broken child.
I feel like you just told part of my story
Yeah,
from the parental perspective.
for
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
So my oldest son was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was 12,
Yeah.
and 12 is pretty late.
Right. I was thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah. So labels can be double-edged swords, but
Right.
so maybe that's a different episode, but
That's like, oh, that could be 3 episodes. You and I could just talk about that for
yes.
3 episodes. Yeah.
They can
The
certainly add,
DSM. Yeah.
oh my goodness. Yeah, we could talk about that all day. And not going down that rabbit hole, there can
Yeah, but
be
so he was
helpful.
yeah.
And so when he was diagnosed, it was just eye-opening and oh my gosh, this is the
Right.
thing we have been trying to figure out. But
Right.
until then, and even continuing after then, every teacher he ever had, every principal, every school special ed instructor, every doctor, every therapist, every behavioral specialist, every psychiatrist
Hmm.
told us the same message. They said, little boy, you are a broken child. You
Mm,
are willfully doing all of this on purpose. You should be
mm,
ashamed of yourself. And why are
mm.
you doing this to your mother? Why are you doing this to me? And mom, this is why babies don't have babies, because I was 16 when I had him.
Oh,
This is why babies don't have
so you
babies.
were shamed on top
I
of
was
that.
shamed and told that I need to learn how to parent my child. And I would say, okay, well, then teach me. So
Right.
last night,
Exactly.
let me give you a scenario. Last night, this is what our evening looked like. This is what he
Hmm.
did. This is what I did. Tell me where I went wrong because I want to know.
Right.
And
Right.
they couldn't do it, but they still had to
Right.
go to that finger pointing.
Right.
And this is the dynamic that you were talking about that,
Right.
whether we're talking about the parents, because I have my moments too, believe me, where I
I'm
have to look
sure.
in the mirror and have my own reckoning with myself, but
Right.
about the
Right.
parents or the professionals who are here to support the child and the families. Until we
Right.
know this stuff, until we know
Right.
the language of the nervous system,
Exactly.
we're making all the wrong assumptions that are causing so much more harm.
Well, also like there's such a focus on behaviors and what neurotypicals have deemed to be correct behaviors.
Exactly.
And but so okay, there's that, which is like just coming with judgment. But then there also is a certain way of being that is required for functioning in the world, which is just a reality.
Yep.
So like both things are true. And
Yeah.
again, like accepting that both things are true is a starting point. But like as a speech therapist, what I would hear and got increasingly frustrated and dissatisfied with it is as soon as he has words, he'll be fine.
Hmm.
Once he has words, he'll be fine. Well, I actually think that the way that I was trained to, and also like the goals that I get, I've done a lot of time in schools. I've done a lot of time. You know what? The pun wasn't intended, but I'll hold it. Like, it does feel like doing time. Like, it does feel like we had a family friend is like he had a job that would bring him into schools, but he wasn't working. So it's like they feel like prisons. I'm like, how do you even know that? You're an accountant. Like, he's like, I've been. I'm like, yes, it does feel like prison, which like kind of exacerbates all of this
Hmm.
because it's very dysregulating. Working as a professional in a school, I always felt like I would say the bells, like
Yes. Oh my goodness.
yeah,
So
just my nervous
jarring.
system. I just felt like rattled every 45 minutes.
Yep.
And then I would have to like lead a group of kids that were rattled every 45 minutes. But words, like, first of all, developmentally, it doesn't make sense. Like everybody's saying, like, once he has words, then he'll be regulated. That's not how human development works. Co-regulation comes well before meaningful verbal exchanges. Like if we're not tuned into each other, it doesn't matter what words we say.
Right.
And also the meaning of the words, the intent is not going to be and the other thing is I have a real beef with social skills because it's a veneer and And it's very misleading. Like, oh, if he just knows the right words to say when X happens, as if it's a formula.
Yeah.
Social skills training can actually undermine social relationships because you think you've got it. But if you're not tuned in, it doesn't matter what you do or say in that moment, you don't got it. And people, especially neurotypicals, will read that. Like, oh, he's just saying a line. Like he doesn't really care how I'm doing.
I think that there's such
Yeah.
a nuanced difference in what you're saying that
Go
is
ahead. Yeah.
incredibly powerful. So, because I remember my kid being told to practice these role plays. So
Yes.
he would role play at school with teachers. He would role play at home with me, and everything about it just felt so wrong to me. But this
Right.
is what going back to what you were saying, this is what the professionals are telling me to do. This
Exactly.
is supposed to
Especially
help them.
as a younger mom, like, okay, I
Yeah,
guess they know what they're talking about.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I would go through this role play, and it just felt like I was teaching my child, don't be yourself.
Right. Right.
And he would learn these role plays, and then he would try
Right.
to do it in real life, and it would go sideways, and he would be
Right.
crushed, like, what did I do wrong? I'm like,
I'm
baby,
following the rules. Like they're still not being friends
exactly,
with me. And
exactly.
like, and he's just worked so much harder in preparation for, I don't know, like asking the girl to the dance or trying to get involved in the baseball game that like every other person there has. And he's failing. And they're like, it's crushing.
And he taught me
Yeah.
so many valuable lessons. One of the that really was game changing to me
Yeah.
was he was probably about 12 when this happened.
Mhm.
Um, we were trying to, he had just received his diagnosis. And so I was learning all I could about Asperger's and autism. And he made this wonderful joke one day. He said, I figured it out. The world speaks broccoli, but I speak asparagus. I'm like, damn right you do.
I
I'm
love
going to learn
it.
asparagus. Isn't that
I
awesome?
want to make t-shirts that say that. Oh my
Yes.
God.
If you do, I want one. Let me know. I will be your
We
first
should we should
customer.
make them, Amy.
Yes, we should. I love that so much. And I carried that with me. And it's like, okay, how
I'm
can I
gonna put that over my
learn,
desk. The world speaks
right?
broccoli, but I speak asparagus. Exactly.
And then that
Exactly.
became
I love that.
the direction for me. Well, how can I learn?
Right.
It's not all his
Right.
responsibility to learn broccoli. He can try.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
one
Exactly.
of those asparagus lessons for me came when we had this binder
Uh,
where I was trying to uh, build our communication bridge and learn
right.
asparagus.
Right.
And
Amazing.
I was creating like chore charts, but for all of us, like mom's name was on the chore chart with the kids. This
I
isn't
love that.
some finger pointing, no child, you got to go do what I say. No, mom has
Right.
to.
Right. Right. Right.
But he was struggling with his chores. So it's like, okay, well, let's, how can we help? We had this binder where I would take one because he was overwhelmed by a whole list of things to do.
Right. 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 Right.
So, okay, well, let's just have one thing per page. And
Right.
then
So
that was
smart.
overwhelming. Okay, well, let's break it down. How can we break it down? Well, what I learned was, to me, taking out the trash is a one-step process. To him, it was more like 12. You have to take
Right.
the bag. First of all, you have to notice when it's full.
Right.
Then you have to stop what you're doing and take the bag out. And then you have to mindfully tie up the bag so it doesn't dump. Then
Right.
you have to
Right.
take it outside and put it where it goes. Then, and this is where a lot of neurotypical people fall off the wagon, you got to come back in and put in a clean bag.
Right.
But what was, at first I was very frustrated and upset with him. But once I learned that it's not a one-step process, he and I are
Right.
looking at this very differently, and he is not wrong. I was
Mhm.
bypassing the nuance of how his brain works and how he
Right.
sees and perceives the world around him.
Hmm. Totally. Totally. And I am thinking of another more like a rather than a procedural example of that, but excuse me, more like a nervous system version of that, that I have a um a colleague and mentor from RDI from my previous training, who it's actually an interview. I was interviewing her many years ago. Um, she tells us such a poignant story, and I share it with all my clients at some point, that she had thought that her child was being non-compliant and unnecessarily difficult every day at bath time.
Mm.
And he would scream so loud. And one day they're having bath time. It's like, I don't know, spring or summer, the window's open, and she hears screaming coming from next door. And she thought, oh, I guess the neighbors are also bathing their child. It was only afterwards that she was able to reflect on the situation. No, he was screaming so loudly that his voice was ricocheting off of the house next door.
Oh, no.
So this is, she's coming, maybe I would imagine a lot of the therapists are telling her compliance. He's being non-compliant. He's just got to get over it and get with the program. It wasn't until they got a really good occupational therapist, and you and I we have more to talk about with this, that was able to like do a proper assessment. She said, no, you think that you're putting your hand is feeling lukewarm water when you are preparing his bath for him. He feels like his skin is being burned.
Yeah, that was my first thought.
Yep, right. He's having a different experience than you think that he's having. And then we're demanding that they see things from our perspective, but we're not taking the time or bothering to see things from the perspective of the child. And we're the parents, professionals, educators who are meant to be supporting them.
Yeah,
And then we wonder why they're not getting with our program. Like, when did we ever try to get with their program?
exactly.
So yeah, that's a big piece of it. So I see it like a lot of times when I actually, oh my gosh, in my last contract, I had a California contract with a school district, and I started as an evaluator, so I read the back paperwork, and a nurse had put first. I saw that this child had a metabolic disorder. He was, at the time I was writing the report, pre-verbal. He was becoming more verbal by the time we were done working together. So it was like over the course of a year. He's in his mid-teens. And on this report, the nurse wrote first like about the metabolic disorder and how he has like these health issues. And then sometimes he'll have these behaviors for no reason. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like,
There's always a reason.
you just wrote about his health issues. He's not verbal. What else is he supposed to do to let people know he's uncomfortable?
Right.
For no reason. What are you talking about? Like, you're supposed to be a health professional.
Yeah.
I was like screaming at my computer. I was reading my husband and I both work from home. It's like, everything okay? Like, how is this a professional? But like a lot of times when I hear like for no reason, it's first of all, a lot of times parents are legitimate. So this is the other thing. Parents are legitimately overwhelmed.
Exactly.
So they might not be knowing how they're coming off to their child and how that is contributing to the situation. But then also, like, our nervous systems, our perceptions are so totally different.
Mhm.
You would not react to that as he's reacting to that. But perhaps if you were experiencing it as he was experiencing it, then you would.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of
Yeah.
my trauma responses that I developed
Mhm.
is sensitivity to sound.
Yes, I have that.
So
I have that too. We have a lot to talk about here. Yeah.
for many, many, many years, for most of my life, I perceived that loud things equals violence,
Right.
equals
Right.
danger. And so
Right.
motorcycles, well,
Mm.
that's dangerous, or big, loud diesel trucks,
The construction vehicles.
construction
Yeah.
vehicles, but also just the big, loud diesel pickups.
Hmm.
And so my brain naturally jumped to
Hmm.
conclusions that, well, if loud things are dangerous, then people who choose to engage in those loud things are dangerous people.
Hmm.
And I had to unlearn that.
Hmm.
And even still, a loud car or truck or motorcycle will zoom past my house, and my nervous system has this part and it's
Hmm.
like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. We're safe.
Right.
It's just noise. There's no meaning to be made. The person
Mhm.
making the noise is probably a safe person, but I know that
Right.
I am safe.
And I just want to like highlight right now exactly what you just described is like sort of like a mini piece of what it means to as an adult, take responsibility for your own nervous system.
Right.
To like recognize that response and that interpretation, and then like step back and evaluate it, and then have a like a reframe for moving forward. Like you just described beautifully what that is.
Right. And people like you and I are out there teaching other people how to do the things that we're not taught in general.
Right. Right.
And these are the things that, a lot of this nervous system education is really coming out of the 90s. And so it's all still,
Right. 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 Dr. Porges.
yeah, exactly. Oh, Dr. Porges
And
and
Deb Dana so that we could understand what Dr. Porges is saying. So,
I love that we
like,
had
I
you.
don't speak Porges, but I do speak Deb Dana. Yeah.
Exactly. And for our
Yeah.
listeners, any other fellow geeks out there who want to learn nervous system speak,
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Google polyvagal theory, Stephen
Yes.
Porges, who developed it. And then, like Julie was saying, Deb Dana is the one who kind of takes the message and brings it to everybody in layman's terms.
And I
So,
want to add to that, any body workers or even people who want to just have some tools for themselves, because I share these with my clients all the time. Stanley Rosenberg. Are you
hmm,
familiar with him?
not.
I slept with his book by my bed forever. And like I moved to where I live now, and there's some other like kind of quirky, not typical therapist that I became friends with. And she also like I went to her house and it's like right there on the coffee table.
Oh, that's great.
Stanley Rosenberg. And he's friends with Dr. Porges. He was a body worker from the US who went to, I'm gonna get it wrong, so I'm not gonna specify, Europe. And but then after meeting Dr. Porges, he started um, developing his method of body work to specifically address the nervous system. And he, in this book, I'm forgetting what it's called, but do I have it? It's always somewhere else. So I do see Deb Dana. And I see there's also I'll have Bessel van der Kolk right there.
Yeah.
Body keeps the score. Yeah, that's an important one. I will say though, if anybody, I would say the first part, in order to illustrate his ideas, I found triggering
Mm.
because he was giving different examples of people who are traumatized, and I really wanted to learn from him, so I got myself through it, but it's intense stuff. But Stanley Rosenberg, he has in his book exercises that you can do yourself that are sort of like quick ways to address the nervous system.
That's beautiful. I thank you for sharing that resource.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of resources, you have a gift for our audience, right?
I do, I do. So, we didn't talk about, really just spoke about like some of the earlier foundational aspects of the method that I've developed.
Mhm.
I think largely because that's our biggest overlap between what you and I do. Um, but as a speech therapist, for me, this was always meant to be about improving communication.
Mhm.
And very interestingly, because I'm working with the parents and it's all about being in sync with each other and improving communication, a lot of parents will say that their marriages have improved. So, and like the whole family becomes more peaceful. Because they've learned to tune in more with themselves. And as they're turning in with their neurodivergent child, if they have more than one child, like, you know what? I'm tuning in more with my other children. And I have one parent who's a single dad who says like he's using a lot of his stuff. He's in sales. He uses a lot of his stuff at work and training his employees and everything. So the gift that I have for the audience is I do have a YouTube channel and I do have like a series of interviews. Actually, I have a lot of old videos that I have to edit and get up there. But the very first video that I made is going to be the gift for the audience.
Oh, great.
And it is, at the moment, it's glitchy, but hopefully by the time this comes out, we'll have fixed the glitches. Um, it is a video, it's the very first video that I made at the beginning of COVID.
Mm.
Because at the time I was working in early intervention as a speech therapist. And you'll see that the particular methodology that I was using at that point was geared towards the younger kids. Um, but a lot of getting out of crisis for families is about, excuse me, hold on a second. is honestly, it's the pressure that we get from professionals a lot of times and on ourselves and the folks in the grocery store who give you the judging looks and everything.
Yes.
Um, but a lot of times our reaction is to try and be doing everything because like a lot of times the difficulties that we're dealing with are not localized. It's not just about words. It's not just about it's not just about taking out the trash. It's a whole different slew of things. So we don't really, we're trying to do everything and we're running. And we hear meet your child where they are,
Mhm.
but it's a very general term.
Yeah,
And it's not clear, like, what does that mean?
exactly.
So the gift that I have to share is it's a play scale that is I didn't create it. It's from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, their autism program, which I think it is ASAP, but I don't remember what that stands for. I think one of the A's is autism. And this is my favorite play scale in 16 years as a speech therapist and I don't know, 7 years as an autism specialist that I found. Um, and it really is for all ages. It's worth watching, or at least it's worth watching to start to get this thinking because it's about going from a way of thinking that's simpler to more complex and more concrete to more abstract. And there are different crossover points that when we're working together. And I even use this when working with adults.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have them on the floor playing with toys if they're developmentally past that, but there are activities that are appropriate to the adults that still help them to develop the more abstract thinking and the more complex thinking that is necessary for getting each other's perspectives and communicating meaningfully. So that's what I'll be sharing. And I'll give you the link.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that gift. And it reminds me of all of us learning how to speak both broccoli and asparagus.
Exactly, exactly. And like to give the parallel to I'm trying to remember if you were broccoli or your son, you were broccoli and your son was asparagus.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So not only does it help your son to speak broccoli, if I'm getting this right, it helps you to speak asparagus because you know what he's saying.
Exactly.
You
Yes.
know his person. It helps the parent or the neurotypical to get the perspective of the neurodivergent communication partner. Um, an example I have of a single dad that I'm working with right now, he and his son have made such incredible progress, and both of them have made progress.
Mm.
It's not just about his son is talking more; he is talking more, but you also see this: the father is much more tuned in, and he's slowing down, and he's matching his son's pace a lot more. So he was trying. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he was trying to do something with his son, and his son wasn't getting it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, let's look back at the play scale.
Mhm.
This is where he is developmentally at this point, and you're trying to get him to understand something that's at this level. So not never, but not today. So
Right.
like, what do we do today to get from here to there? Like he trusts it now because he's already seen how far he and his son have come.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I call it I don't do assessments, but rather I call it I share mall maps. Kind
Mm.
of like when you're at the mall and it's like all these stores and all this lights and sound and everything, especially for neurodivergence, is very overwhelming. But it's like, I want to be here. Where am I now?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not like, don't worry about the ages at the top and like your child is like 17 years older than that. But if you know where he is now, you know what to be working on now. And that
Exactly.
means that you can quiet down everything else. You could stop running to all of these other things
Mm.
because you know what you're doing is right. And then eventually the parents start to trust. And you know what? They don't. All of these people who are taking my money and taking my time and like my car miles, they
Mm.
don't know what I know. And then I find that a lot of the parents that really are able to engage with this, and the difference is whether or not they're able to take responsibility for their own nervous systems.
Yes.
They make like progress from here to here while we're working together, but then I check back a year later and a year later. because my goal is that everybody should be mastering this.
Right. Once they
Dependence.
learn what it is
Exactly.
they're experiencing and what their child is experiencing, once they
Exactly.
start to learn that nervous system language,
Right.
then it's almost an unfolding. It almost just happens.
Exactly. It's very organic. It's very organic. And it's not about the parent getting the child to comply.
Right.
That's it. Another thing is that a lot of times we are done working together when your child is starting to internalize these things. So that's what makes it a lot less work.
Right.
It's not like you're trying to tame a tiger. It's that you like a belligerent tiger. It's that like you are supporting your child to enter the world on their own terms and
Exactly.
to recognize when they have a right to go out of the world because that's what they need.
Yes.
Yeah, and that it's not like unfriendly or non-compliant. It's like that you're trusting them to know what they need.
Exactly. And honoring the boundaries that they set to protect
Exactly.
themselves and to meet their needs. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a whole other conversation. The importance of boundaries and relationship.
Yes, it is.
Yes. And so that's what makes it a safe relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Julie, this has been such a fun conversation. I could just
So
keep
much
on
fun.
going and going. I
Okay.
wonder, where can our audience, our listeners find you? You
Okay.
mentioned
So what was that?
you mentioned YouTube.
Yeah, I do have a YouTube channel. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Um, there's some of my YouTube videos on my website, which is probably the best place to find me, which is www.hearmywordsautism.com. And I'll share that with you. You could put it in the notes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you have just any final words for our guests before we end our conversation.
This is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that there is so much there is so much more right about your child than oh, I didn't think I was going to get emotional at the end, than what's wrong. And you're probably doing a lot more right than what
Mhm.
you're being told.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
And embracing those two things are the beginning of getting where you really want to go.
That's beautiful. And those are powerful. That's a powerful quote to end on. Thank you, Julie, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Becoming and Belonging. I'd love to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway from today's episode? Share your thoughts, reflections, any questions that came up. You can connect on social media or leave a comment wherever you're tuning in to keep the conversation going. If you found this episode meaningful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit from it. Until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and remember, you belong here.